1,000 years before the Clone Wars, the galaxy was a very different place. The Republic was ancient even then, but it wasn't the beacon of peace and justice we'd come to know. It was a time of darkness, a time when the Sith were at the height of their power. They weren't hiding in the shadows. They weren't plotting from secret bases on forgotten worlds. The Sith were an empire that rivaled the Jedi in numbers and dominated vast swathes of the galaxy. Among these Sith was a human male who would change everything. His name was Darth Bane. Born on Moraband, the ancient Sith homeworld, Bane wasn't just another Dark Lord. He was destined to become perhaps the most influential Sith who ever lived, though not for the reasons you might expect. Picture Moraband, with its blood-red sands and crimson skies, a world steeped in dark side energy. The ancient temples and tombs of fallen Sith lords dotted its harsh landscape, silently whispering secrets of power to those who could hear them. This was the world that shaped Bane's earliest understanding of the Force and the dark side. During this era, the Old Republic was locked in a seemingly endless conflict with the Sith. Unlike the more familiar Galactic Civil War or even the Clone Wars, this wasn't a battle between armies with different ideologies. This was a fundamental clash between light and dark, between Jedi and Sith, with both sides fielding forces that could devastate entire star systems. Bane served in what was known as the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Sith Empire of his day. On the surface, it seemed like the Sith had never been stronger. Their armies were vast, their dark side practitioners numerous. But Bane saw something others missed. He witnessed how the Sith Lords competed with each other, how they schemed and plotted against their own kind. In their hunger for individual power, they weakened the whole. Every victory against the Jedi came at a cost, not just in resources, but in unity. Sith would sabotage other Sith to claim glory. They would withhold crucial intelligence if it meant another Lord might fail. They assassinated their superiors not when it served the greater cause, but when it served their personal ambition. The Sith killed each other, as Bane would later put it, victims of their own greed. The infighting reached a breaking point during the Jedi-Sith War. While the Brotherhood of Darkness had the numbers and the power to potentially defeat the Jedi Order, they lacked the cohesion. Their fractured leadership made them vulnerable, and the Jedi, united in purpose if not always in strategy, exploited these weaknesses. The war culminated at the mid-rim planet of Ruusan in 1032 BBY. It should have been just another battle in the long conflict, but it became something more. It became the end of an era. The Sith forces, divided by their own ambitions, fell before the coordinated assault of the Jedi. What should have been a difficult but winnable fight turned into a catastrophe for the Brotherhood of Darkness. As Sith Lords fell by the dozens, some to Jedi blades but many to betrayal from their own kind, Bane did something unexpected. Instead of fighting to the last alongside his brethren, he orchestrated their final destruction. The details have been lost to history, but what's known is that when the dust settled on Ruusan, the Jedi believed all the Sith had been destroyed, all except one. From the ashes of destruction, I was the last survivor, Bane would later claim. But this wasn't mere fortune or superior fighting skill. Bane had realized that the old ways of the Sith were doomed to failure. The very philosophy that drove the Sith to seek power as individuals made it impossible for them to stand united against the Jedi. In those moments after Ruusan, As the Jedi celebrated what they thought was the final defeat of their ancient enemy, Darth Bane made a decision that would echo through the next 1,000 years of galactic history. The Sith would survive, but not as they had been, not as an empire that challenged the Republic openly, not as an order of dozens or hundreds of Dark Lords constantly undermining each other. The Sith would become something new, something hidden, something patient. Looking out at a galaxy that believed his kind extinct, Bane began formulating a plan not just for survival, but for eventual victory. The Jedi had won the battle and believed they'd won the war, but Bane understood something fundamental about power and time that his fallen comrades never had. True victory doesn't always come from overwhelming force or dramatic confrontation. Sometimes it comes from simply outlasting your enemy, from watching and waiting as they grow complacent in their perceived safety, from striking not when you're at your strongest, but when they're at their weakest. As the sole survivor of the Jedi-Sith War, Darth Bane had the opportunity to rebuild the Sith Order from scratch. He could discard what didn't work and preserve what did. He could create something that would avoid the mistakes of the past while retaining the core of what made the Sith powerful. And that's exactly what he did. In the aftermath of what the Jedi thought was their greatest victory, Bane laid the groundwork for their eventual destruction. The galaxy entered what seemed like a golden age of peace, unaware that in the shadows, a new kind of darkness was taking form. A darkness that would grow slowly but inexorably over the centuries, culminating in the fall of the Republic and the Jedi Order 1,000 years later. This is the story of how one man's vision changed the course of galactic history. This is the story of Darth Bane. Standing amidst the ruins of the Brotherhood of Darkness, Darth Bane made what might be the most consequential decision in Sith history. The old ways had failed. The ancient approach of Sith armies and academies full of dark side practitioners had led only to defeat and near extinction. If the Sith were to survive, they needed something new, something revolutionary. What Bane created was deceptively simple, yet brilliant in its clarity. There should be only 2 Sith at any given time, no more, no less. A master and an apprentice, one to embody power, the other to crave it. Think about that for a moment. After millennia of Sith empires with countless lords and apprentices, Bane reduced their entire order to just 2 individuals. It was a radical reimagining of what the Sith could be. But this wasn't a retreat. It wasn't surrender. It was the birth of something far more dangerous than anything that had come before. The rule of 2 drew inspiration from an older and rarer force concept called the dyad, a powerful bond that could form between 2 force users. But Bane wasn't interested in spiritual connections. He was building a mechanism for the survival and evolution of the Sith that addressed the fundamental flaws he had witnessed. When dozens of Sith Lords vie for supremacy, they waste energy fighting each other instead of their true enemies. They form factions, they plot, they sabotage. The dark side itself encourages this behavior. It rewards ambition and the pursuit of power. Bane didn't try to change this nature. Instead, he harnessed it. Under the rule of 2, ambition became the engine of advancement. The master would train the apprentice, teaching them the ways of the dark side, passing down knowledge that might otherwise be lost. But both parties understood the inevitable conclusion of this relationship. The apprentice would eventually challenge the master. If the apprentice won, they would become the new master and take on an apprentice of their own. If they failed, they would die, and the master would find a new student worthy of the Sith teachings. This succession mechanism ensured that each generation of Sith would theoretically be stronger than the last. Only by surpassing their master could an apprentice claim the title for themselves. It was Sith evolution distilled to its purest form, survival of the strongest, with no place for weakness or failure. But the rule of two wasn't just about preserving Sith knowledge or ensuring the dark side remained strong in their lineage. It was about vengeance. It was about the ultimate defeat of the Jedi and the Republic. And for that, Bane knew the Sith needed to change how they fought their war. The old Sith confronted their enemies directly. They built massive armies, they conquered worlds, they established empires that challenged the Republic openly. And they lost. Time and again, they lost. So Bane initiated a tactical shift so complete it would render the Sith unrecognizable to their ancient predecessors. Gone were the days of direct confrontation. The new Sith would operate from the shadows. They would use deception and manipulation where brute force had failed. They would infiltrate rather than invade. They would corrupt rather than conquer, at least at first. They would be patient in a way the Sith had never been before. This approach required a plan, not a battle plan that would unfold over days or weeks, but a grand strategy that would take centuries to come to fruition. Bane initiated what would later be called the Grand Plan. The Sith would work secretly to corrupt the Republic from within. They would gradually diminish the influence and power of the Jedi Order, and eventually, when both institutions were at their weakest, the Sith would strike, revealing themselves only at the moment of their triumph. It was a plan so ambitious, so far-reaching, that Bane himself would never live to see its completion. It would take many generations of Sith, each master and apprentice pair adding their own contribution to the grand design. The plan would evolve over time, adapting to changing circumstances, but always moving toward the same ultimate goal: galactic dominance and the destruction of the Jedi. To begin this journey, Bane took on an apprentice of his own. Her name was Darth Zannah, and she would become the first test of his new doctrine. Bane began passing on his knowledge to her, teaching her not just the ways of the dark side, but his vision for the future of the Sith. He taught her patience and cunning. He showed her how to hide her true nature from the Jedi. He prepared her to one day take his place and continue the lineage he had established. Their relationship embodied the duality at the heart of the rule of two. As master, Bane was both mentor and eventual target. As apprentice, Zannah was both student and future usurper. Each knew their role, each accepted the inevitability of their final confrontation. This tension between them wasn't a bug in Bane's system. It was a feature. It was what would drive both of them to grow stronger in the dark side. The Jedi, meanwhile, believed the Sith threat had been eliminated with Bane's apparent defeat. They entered what they thought was a new age of peace, unaware that their ancient enemy had merely changed form. While the Jedi built temples and trained new generations of knights to maintain this hard-won peace, the Sith were busy laying the groundwork for its eventual destruction. What made the rule of two so insidious was its immunity to detection. Two Sith, no matter how powerful, could disappear into the vastness of the galaxy in a way an empire of dark side users never could. They could move unnoticed, their presence masked by distance and deception. The dark side itself helped conceal them, clouding the Jedi's ability to sense their ancient foe. This was the beginning of the Sith's 1,000-year game of patience. With each passing of the mantle from master to apprentice, with each new generation furthering the grand plan, they moved one step closer to their revenge. The Jedi would never see them coming until it was too late, and it all began with one man, one vision, one rule that would reshape the galaxy. All great stories have endings, even for those who reshape the galaxy. For Darth Bane, the architect of the modern Sith, his personal journey concluded as he had designed it to. Historical records tell us that Bane met his fate at the hands of his own apprentice, Darth Zannah. Their final confrontation played out on the inner rim planet of Umbria, though some accounts suggest it may have occurred on Moraband itself. Regardless of location, the outcome fulfilled the very doctrine Bane had established. The apprentice challenged the master and prevailed. The rule of two wasn't just philosophy, it was prophecy. Bane knew his destiny was to be surpassed, to be struck down by the student he had trained. When that moment came, it wasn't failure, but fulfillment. The cycle he created had completed its first revolution. After his death, Bane's remains were transported to Moraband, the ancient Sith homeworld, with its blood-red sands and valleys carved by darkness itself. There, in the legendary Valley of the Dark Lords, a final resting place was prepared for him. A massive sarcophagus adorned with runic inscriptions in the ancient Sith language of Urkitat would house his physical form for eternity. This wasn't a simple burial. It was a statement. The Valley of the Dark Lords contained the tombs of the most powerful Sith in history, rulers of empires and wielders of terrible dark side powers. By placing Bane among them, his successors acknowledged his equal standing with these ancient figures. The inscription in Urkitat, a language dating back to the original Sith species, connected him to the oldest traditions of their order while simultaneously marking the beginning of something new. What makes Bane's entombment particularly significant is that he would be the last Sith Lord ever buried on Moraband. After him, the Sith would remain hidden, their deaths as secret as their lives. This final honor highlighted the pivotal role he played in their history, standing at the crossroads between the old ways and the new. A colossal statue of Bane in his armor was erected at the far end of his burial chamber. This imposing figure, towering in silent vigilance, served as a physical reminder of his contribution to Sith ideology. The armor depicted in the statue was distinctive, featuring blue, gray, and red coloration with intricate gold etching. This ceremonial battle armor had become synonymous with Bane himself, a symbol of his warrior spirit and the martial prowess that had allowed him to survive when all other Sith perished. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Bane's legacy wasn't physical at all. His tomb was said to be haunted by a fiery spectral image of the Dark Lord himself. Whether this was truly Bane's spirit preserved through some dark side technique, a manifestation of the powerful dark side energies concentrated in the Valley of the Dark Lords, or simply legends that grew around his already imposing figure, the effect was the same. Even in death, Darth Bane remained a presence to be reckoned with. This spectral manifestation would play a role in galactic history thousands of years after Bane's physical death. During the Clone Wars, Jedi Grandmaster Yoda journeyed to Moraband on a spiritual quest to unlock the secrets of immortality. There, he encountered the fiery apparition of Bane himself. The Spectre attempted to tempt Yoda to the dark side, a final test in the Jedi Master's trials. But Yoda, with his centuries of wisdom, recognized the vision for what it was, dismissing it as an illusion that held no power over him. The true power of Bane's legacy, however, wasn't in statues or specters. It was in the deception that followed his death. With Bane seemingly defeated and Zannah vanishing into the shadows, the Jedi Order came to a fateful conclusion. The Sith were finally extinct. This wasn't a reasonable assumption given the historical pattern of Sith empires rising, falling, and rising again. It was exactly the conclusion Bane had engineered them to reach. For 1,000 years, the Jedi believed their ancient enemies vanquished, relegated to history books and cautionary tales told to younglings. They dismantled much of their military infrastructure, transforming from warriors to peacekeepers, from generals to diplomats and scholars. The Republic itself grew comfortable, even complacent, in this era without the Sith threat looming over them. All the while, Bane's true legacy continued in perfect secrecy. Zannah took an apprentice of her own, passing down not just Sith knowledge, but Bane's grand vision. This apprentice would eventually challenge and replace Zannah, continuing the cycle. Generation after generation, the rule of two ensured that the Sith survived, growing stronger with each succession, patiently working toward their ultimate goal. This lineage would stretch through a millennium, each master and apprentice pair adding their own contributions to the grand plan, while maintaining absolute secrecy. The Jedi remained oblivious to this hidden threat growing in their midst, never suspecting that their ancient enemy was not only surviving, but thriving in a new form. The pattern Bane established would continue unbroken until it reached its culmination in Darth Sidious and his apprentice, Darth Vader. These final Sith Lords in Bane's lineage would achieve what countless Sith empires had failed to accomplish: the near-total destruction of the Jedi Order and the transformation of the Republic into a Sith-ruled empire. This was the true genius of Bane's vision. He understood that the Sith had been fighting the wrong war in the wrong way. Direct confrontation had failed them repeatedly, but patience, deception, and carefully targeted manipulation could succeed where brute force could not. By accepting that he would not live to see the final victory, by creating a system designed to span generations, Bane ensured that the Sith would ultimately triumph. The irony is that while most beings in the galaxy never knew Darth Bane's name, his influence shaped their lives more profoundly than almost any other single individual in galactic history. The fall of the Republic, the rise of the Empire, the near extinction of the Jedi Order, all of these galaxy-altering events traced their origins back to one man's decision to remake the Sith from the ground up. In the end, Bane's physical remains might have rested in a sarcophagus on Moraband, but his true monument was the 1,000-year plan that would eventually bring the galaxy to its knees. The Jedi celebrated what they thought was the end of the Sith, never realizing that they were actually witnessing a new beginning, a transformation that would make their ancient enemy more dangerous than ever before. 1,000 years is a long time to wait for revenge. Most beings can barely maintain focus on a goal for a decade, let alone a millennium. Yet that's exactly what the Sith accomplished following Darth Bane's reformation. Generation after generation, they operated in absolute secrecy, each master and apprentice pair inching closer to their ultimate objective. This wasn't just patience, this was strategic brilliance on a timeline few could comprehend. The Sith were slowly infiltrating the very institutions the Jedi had sworn to protect. They wormed their way into banking clans, trade federations, political circles, and eventually the Republic Senate itself. Each position of influence was a piece on a Dejoric board, being arranged for a game that would take centuries to play out. The beauty of the Rule of Two was that it allowed the Sith to adapt over time. When one approach failed, the next master could try something different. When galactic politics shifted, the Sith shifted with them. While maintaining their core objective, they demonstrated a flexibility that had been impossible under the old Sith Empire model, with its competing agendas and power struggles. This grand scheme, spanning dozens of generations of Sith Lords, finally culminated in one man, Sheev Palpatine, known to his apprentice and the few who glimpsed his true nature as Darth Sidious. If Bane was the architect of the modern Sith, Sidious was the master builder who completed the structure Bane had designed. Recognized as the greatest Sith Lord since Bane himself, Sidious embodied the pinnacle of what the Rule of Two was meant to create. Sidious understood something fundamental about power and perception. He recognized that the most effective path to control wasn't through conquest, but through invitation. People will fight against an invader, but they will welcome a savior. The galaxy wouldn't be taken. It would be given away by beings who thought they were saving themselves. The Clone Wars were the masterstroke of this strategy. After decades of manipulating galactic politics from the shadows, Sidious engineered a conflict that the Republic couldn't ignore, but also couldn't easily win. As his public persona of Chancellor Palpatine, he appeared to reluctantly accept emergency powers to deal with the Separatist crisis. Meanwhile, as Darth Sidious, he secretly controlled both sides of the war. This wasn't just about gaining political control. The war served multiple purposes in the grand Sith plan. It stretched the Jedi thin, forcing them to become generals rather than peacekeepers. It placed them in command of armies, compromising their ideals and creating tension between their traditional role and their new military responsibilities. And perhaps most cleverly, it positioned them as leaders in a controversial conflict, eroding public support for the Jedi Order. All the while, Sidious was preparing for the final act. The clone army that fought for the Republic carried a hidden directive, a secret protocol embedded in their very minds. Order 66 was designed to appear as just one contingency among many, but its true purpose was singular and devastating: the elimination of the Jedi Order. When the moment was right, when the pieces were perfectly aligned, Sidious gave the command. Across the galaxy, clone troopers who had fought alongside Jedi for years suddenly turned their weapons against their commanders. The clone soldiers weren't turning against friends out of malice or betrayal. They were following programming they couldn't resist, believing the Jedi had become traitors to the Republic they had sworn to protect. The timing was impeccable. The Jedi, spread thin across countless battlefronts, were isolated and vulnerable. Most never saw the attack coming. Those who sensed something through the Force had precious little time to react. In a single coordinated strike, the once mighty Jedi Order was reduced to scattered survivors hunted across the stars. With the Jedi decimated, Sidious moved to secure his position. Appearing before the Senate with his face disfigured, allegedly from a Jedi assassination attempt, he painted the Jedi as traitors who had sought to overthrow the Republic. In the same speech, he announced the transformation of the Republic into the first galactic empire, with himself as emperor. The Senate, gripped by fear and manipulation, responded with thunderous applause, willingly surrendering the democracy they had cherished for thousands of years. This moment marked the fulfillment of the vendetta Bane had initiated a millennium earlier. The Jedi were destroyed, the Republic was gone, and a Sith Lord ruled the galaxy. What countless Sith armies had failed to achieve through force, Sidious accomplished through patience and deception, just as Bane had envisioned. But there was one more element to Sidious's victory, one that would have made Bane particularly satisfied. Anakin Skywalker, believed by the Jedi to be the chosen one destined to bring balance to the Force and destroy the Sith, was turned to the dark side. Sidious had cultivated a relationship with Skywalker from childhood, positioning himself as a mentor and friend, while the Jedi Council kept the powerful young man at arm's length. He exploited Anakin's fears, particularly his terror of losing those he loved, just as he had lost his mother. When Anakin began having visions of his wife Padme dying in childbirth, Sidious offered what seemed like the only solution: dark side powers that could supposedly prevent death itself. The seduction was complete when Anakin, desperate to save Padme, intervened in Sidious's apparent arrest by Jedi Master Mace Windu. In that moment of choice, Anakin Skywalker fell to the dark side and was reborn as Darth Vader. The very person meant to destroy the Sith became Sidious's new apprentice, maintaining the rule of two even as the Sith achieved their ultimate victory. Vader's transformation represented the final triumph of Bane's vision. Not only had the Sith destroyed their enemies and taken control of the galaxy, but they had turned the Jedi's greatest hope into their most fearsome enforcer. It was a victory not just of power, but of ideology, a repudiation of everything the Jedi stood for. From that point forward, the Empire ruled the galaxy with an iron fist. The Jedi were vilified in official histories, their temples converted to Imperial use or destroyed outright. The Force itself became seen as little more than ancient superstition as a new generation grew up under Imperial propaganda. Even the memory of the Republic began to fade as Imperial control tightened. This was Bane's legacy, fully realized. His insight that the Sith needed to change to survive had proven correct beyond even his ambitious imagination. His rule of two had created a lineage of increasingly powerful Sith Lords, culminating in Sidious and Vader. His strategy of patience and deception had succeeded where countless Sith armies had failed, and his vision of Sith rule had finally come to pass, 1,000 years after his death. Death isn't always the end in the Star Wars galaxy, especially for those strong in the Force. While most beings simply become one with the cosmic energy field upon dying, some find ways to maintain their consciousness, to persist in some form long after their physical bodies have turned to dust. For the Jedi, this manifested as the ability to return as Force ghosts. For the Sith, the options were more limited, but their influence could still echo across the centuries. No one understood this better than Jedi Grand Master Yoda. In 19 BBY, As the Clone Wars reached their climax, Yoda embarked on a mysterious journey that took him far from the battlefields where clone troopers and battle droids clashed. His destination was Moraband, the ancient Sith homeworld, a place few Jedi had dared to tread for thousands of years. Yoda wasn't seeking conquest or confrontation. He was pursuing knowledge, specifically the secret of how to maintain consciousness after death, a skill that had long been thought impossible. This quest had begun with a shocking revelation: the voice of the long-dead Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn speaking to him from beyond the grave. If a Jedi could preserve their identity after becoming one with the Force, it would change everything about how the Order understood life, death, and the Force itself. The path to this knowledge led Yoda through a series of trials designed to test his worthiness and his resistance to the dark side. These trials weren't random. They were orchestrated by mysterious entities known as the Force Priestesses, ancient beings who guarded the deepest secrets of the Force. They pushed Yoda to confront his fears, his pride, and his understanding of the Force itself. On Moraband, amidst the red sands and crumbling temples that had once housed Sith Academies, Yoda's final trials began. He entered the Valley of the Dark Lords, where generations of Sith rulers had been entombed. The dark side was palpable here, a heavy presence that would have overwhelmed a lesser Jedi. For Yoda, with his centuries of experience and deep connection to the light, it was manageable, but still dangerous. His path led him to the tomb of Darth Bane himself. From the sarcophagus emerged a fiery apparition, a spectral image of the ancient Sith Lord in his iconic armor. This vision addressed Yoda directly, its voice echoing with power despite the millennium that had passed since Bane's physical death. The specter introduced itself as the creator of the Rule of Two, boasting of how it had chosen to pass its knowledge to only one apprentice at a time. This wasn't actually Bane's spirit, at least not in the same way that Jedi like Qui-Gon had learned to preserve their consciousness. It was a manifestation created by the Force Priestesses as part of Yoda's trial, drawn from the residual dark side energies in Bane's tomb and the cultural memory of the fearsome Sith Lord. But to Yoda, facing this test, the distinction hardly mattered. The challenge was real. Regardless of the apparition's true nature, the spectral Bane attempted to tempt Yoda, to make him question his devotion to the light side. This was the nature of the dark side, always probing for weakness, always offering power in exchange for submission. But Yoda, despite his small stature, possessed a will as solid as the ancient stones of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. He faced the fiery specter without fear, declaring simply an illusion. With those words, with that refusal to be swayed, Yoda banished the screaming specter back into the sarcophagus. It was a demonstration of mastery not through aggression or domination, but through clarity and understanding. By recognizing the apparition for what it was, by refusing to give it power over him, Yoda passed this portion of his trials and continued on his journey toward the knowledge he sought. This encounter, brief as it was, created a direct connection between the prequel era and the ancient history of the Sith. It bridged 1,000 years in a single conversation, linking the Clone Wars to the time when the Sith operated openly. For viewers of the Clone Wars series, it was their first glimpse of the legendary figure who had reshaped the Sith and set in motion the plans that would eventually lead to Palpatine's rise. Yoda's journey to Moraband and his encounter with the vision of Bane didn't remain completely secret. The experience was eventually documented in a set of hand-drawn maps believed to be created by the Ithorian artist Gamut Kond. These maps, along with illustrations of Bane's fiery spectre, were later restored and collected in the Graph Archive on the Moon Orcus II. They served as a rare record of an encounter between one of the greatest Jedi Masters and the visage of the Sith Lord who had reformed his ancient order. The legacy of Darth Bane continued to echo through galactic history in other ways as well. Between 3 and 4 ABY, when Luke Skywalker was still struggling to understand his place as possibly the last of the Jedi, he traveled to the planet Gazian. There he encountered something extraordinary, a duplicate consciousness of Jedi Master Elzar Mann, a Jedi who had lived during the High Republic era. This imprint of Mann's mind offered Luke a glimpse of the Republic and the Jedi Order at their peak, describing that period as a golden age that had flourished approximately 800 years after the Jedi had ended the rule of Darth Bane. For Luke, who had received minimal formal training and was hungry for knowledge about Jedi history, even this passing reference to Bane was overwhelming. It highlighted how much he still had to learn about the Force, the Jedi, and their ancient enemies. As Luke continued his journey to rebuild the Jedi Order, he made a point of recording what he learned about its history. In a book titled The Secrets of the Jedi, he included mentions of Bane and the Rule of Two, preserving this knowledge for future generations of Jedi. This documentation acknowledged the significance of understanding Bane's tactics and rationale, framing it as crucial information if the Jedi were to prevent another rise of the Sith. Interestingly, Luke wasn't the only one recording history during this period. Darth Sidious, before his final death, also created a chronicle of Sith knowledge called The Secrets of the Sith. In it, he specifically mentioned Bane, acknowledging him as a great Sith Lord who had survived the purge of the ancient Sith and ensured their revival through the Rule of Two. Sidious even credited Bane as the founder of the lineage that had culminated in his own rise to power. These parallel records, created by figures on opposite sides of the Force, demonstrate how central Bane's legacy was to understanding the history of both Jedi and Sith. 1,000 years after his physical death, his name was still spoken with reverence by Sith and with cautious respect by Jedi. Few individuals in galactic history could claim such lasting impact, such persistent influence on how both sides of the Force understood themselves and their opposition. Through specter and story, through record and recollection, Darth Bane continued to cast a long shadow over the galaxy long after his remains had been sealed in that sarcophagus on Moraband. His encounters with later generations, whether through visions like the one Yoda faced or through the lasting impact of his Rule of Two, ensured that he would never truly be forgotten. To truly understand Darth Bane, we need to look beyond his actions and examine the mind that conceived the Rule of Two. What kind of person could orchestrate a plan designed to unfold over centuries? What drove him to remake the Sith so completely? The answers reveal a being of remarkable complexity and vision. At his core, Bane believed that strength should dominate weakness. This wasn't just a philosophical stance, but a deeply held conviction born from personal experience and extensive study of ancient Sith texts. Unlike many dark side adherents who simply craved power for its own sake, Bane approached the Force with an almost scientific mindset. He analyzed what had worked and what had failed throughout Sith history, applying these lessons to forge something new. When Bane looked at the Brotherhood of Darkness, he didn't just see an organization that was losing a war. He saw a fundamental flaw in how the Sith operated. The constant infighting, the backstabbing, the power struggles, all of it weakened them collectively. It wasn't just that Sith were killing each other. It was that the wrong Sith were often rising to positions of authority, not through superior ability, but through cunning political maneuvering or outright treachery. This analysis of Sith weakness came from a mind that valued clarity and honesty, at least with himself. Bane had no illusions about the dark side or its practitioners. He understood the nature of the Sith as few before him had. They were ambitious, greedy, selfish. These traits weren't flaws to be corrected, but features to be harnessed in a system that turned these very qualities into strengths. The strategic vision that produced the Rule of Two revealed Bane as someone who could think beyond his own lifetime. Most beings, even Force users, focus on what they can accomplish within their own span of years. Bane designed a system meant to outlast him by centuries, showing a rare capacity for long-term planning. He accepted that he would never see the ultimate fruition of his work. The revenge against the Jedi that he sought would come long after his bones had turned to dust. Like many Sith before and after him, Bane inspired fear in those he encountered. But unlike many dark side wielders who relied on raw displays of power or cruelty to intimidate, Bane's fearsome reputation came from something more subtle. It was his absolute conviction, his unwavering purpose, his willingness to sacrifice anything and everything for his vision that truly unnerved others. People feared Bane not just for what he could do, but for what he was willing to do. As a former member of the Brotherhood of Darkness, Bane had received military training and demonstrated considerable tactical acumen. History recognizes him for these skills, noting that he understood warfare and leadership in ways that extended beyond Force abilities. This practical knowledge informed his approach to remaking the Sith. He wasn't just a mystic or philosopher, but a strategist who understood how to win conflicts both large and small. In combat, Bane was a formidable opponent. Descriptions of his fighting style mention his agility and strength, qualities that made him particularly effective with a lightsaber. He used intimidation as part of his combat approach, understanding that fear could cripple an enemy as effectively as any physical blow. Those who faced him in battle rarely lived to describe the experience, but the few accounts that exist speak of overwhelming power and precision. Beyond his philosophy and fighting skills, Bane was a powerful Force wielder with a keen intelligence. His control over the dark side allowed him to perform feats that impressed even other Sith. Yet, interestingly, historical records note that for all his abilities, Bane lacked diplomatic skills. He wasn't a negotiator or compromiser. When faced with obstacles, his instinct wasn't to find common ground, but to overcome through strength or cunning. The equipment Bane used reflected both practical concerns and his status as a Dark Lord of the Sith. He wore distinctive armor in blue, gray, and red colors, with intricate gold etching covering most of his body. This armor wasn't just ceremonial but functional, designed to protect and intimidate in equal measure. The color scheme and design elements connected him visually to ancient Sith traditions while setting him apart from his contemporaries. His primary weapon was the traditional red-bladed lightsaber carried by most Sith, but he was also known to wield a more unusual weapon, a lightsaber pike featuring a fiery orange blade. This dual capability in weaponry speaks to his versatility as a warrior, able to adapt his fighting style to different situations and opponents. For transportation, Bane owned a T-class long-range personal cruiser named the Valken. This ship, later used by other Sith Lords, served as both transportation and mobile base of operations. The fact that subsequent Sith continued to use this vessel suggests it held some significance in their tradition, perhaps becoming a symbol of the lineage Bane established. But Bane's greatest weapon wasn't his lightsaber or his mastery of the Force. It was his mind. His intellect and vision for the future of the Sith Order allowed him to see possibilities others missed and to plan for contingencies others couldn't imagine. He was, in many ways, the perfect embodiment of what the Sith could be. Powerful, yes, but also patient, strategic, and utterly focused on long-term objectives. The plan Bane set in motion would eventually culminate in the rise of Darth Sidious and the fall of both the Republic and the Jedi Order. Yet for all its brilliance, the grand plan had a fundamental flaw that perhaps even Bane couldn't have foreseen. The Sith victory proved remarkably short-lived. The Emperor's reign lasted merely a generation, ending abruptly at the Battle of Endor in 4 ABY. There, Darth Vader, Sidious's apprentice and the heir to Bane's legacy, made a choice that would have been unthinkable to most Sith. Vader sacrificed himself to save his son, Luke Skywalker. In doing so, he killed the Emperor and died as the last Sith Lord in Bane's lineage. This act of selfless love ran counter to everything the Sith stood for. It wasn't ambition or power hunger that ended the Sith. It was compassion, the very quality they had rejected as weakness. This moment fulfilled another prophecy, one that had predicted Anakin Skywalker would bring balance to the Force as the Chosen One. By destroying both himself and his master, the last of the Sith, Anakin seemed to have finally balanced the scales that had tilted toward darkness during the Empire's reign. The cycle of Sith rule that Bane had initiated a millennium earlier appeared to be broken once and for all. But the galaxy has a way of confounding expectations. Unknown to almost everyone, Sidious had prepared for the possibility of his death. Through means that remain mysterious and controversial, he was resurrected, his consciousness transferred to a cloned body. From the shadows, he created a being named Supreme Leader Snoke to rule the First Order as his proxy, continuing to manipulate galactic events from behind the scenes. This resurrection challenged the notion that Vader's sacrifice had truly ended the Sith. If Sidious lived on, then perhaps Bane's lineage remained unbroken. The First Order rose from the ashes of the Empire, once again threatening the newfound freedom of the galaxy. Kylo Ren, grandson of Darth Vader, seemed poised to continue the dark legacy, despite not formally bearing the title of Sith. The final chapter of this millennia-spanning saga came in 35 ABY. In a confrontation that echoed across generations, Sidious faced Rey, a young woman who would later be revealed as his granddaughter. Drawing on the strength of all the Jedi who had come before her, Rey defeated Sidious once and for all, bringing a true end to Bane's 1,000-year vendetta and the Sith Order he had rebuilt. The story of Darth Bane is, in many ways, the story of the modern Star Wars galaxy. His vision, his rule of two, his grand plan, all of it shaped events that would unfold long after his death. From the Clone Wars to the fall of the Republic, from the rise of the Empire to its eventual defeat, the long shadow of Darth Bane's influence can be seen in all of it. What makes Bane's legacy so fascinating is its mixture of success and failure. He succeeded beyond what any single Sith Lord had accomplished before, creating a system that allowed the Sith to survive, grow stronger, and eventually achieve dominance. Yet ultimately, the very same rule of two that preserved the Sith for a millennium also ensured their eventual destruction. By concentrating all Sith knowledge and power in just two individuals, Bane created a system that could be ended with the deaths of just two people. Perhaps the most important lesson from Bane's story is about the nature of the dark side itself. For all its promises of freedom and power, it remains a force of destruction that eventually consumes its adherents. Even the most brilliant plan, even the most patient strategy, even the most disciplined approach to the dark side ultimately led to the same end as all previous Sith endeavors: defeat. And yet, the fascination with Darth Bane endures. His tomb on Moraband, his spectral appearances, his mentions in both Jedi and Sith historical records all speak to a figure who transcended the typical boundaries of galactic memory. In an odd way, Bane achieved a form of immortality, not through conquering death as many Sith sought to do, but through the lasting impact of his ideas. Long after his physical form had vanished, the ripples of his choices continued to shape the fate of the galaxy.